Welcome to the Totally Awesome Fishing Show. Quite simply, it's got to be the greatest fishing show on YouTube now. Oh my God. OMG. Now then, I was looking through my bits and bobs and I came across one of these. Now who knows what that is out there? Yes, it's a wooden fishing reel, but we used to call them years ago. I was too young to use them. I was too young. A Scarborough. Obviously, they were used off the Scarborough coast. And these were original beach reels used for casting out as far as you could get and retrieving quickly, yards and yards of line, obviously because it's a huge diameter reel, for predominantly shore fishing for cod. Now I got to thinking about cod, as you do when you're laying in bed at night and the wife's snoring and you can't get to sleep. I was thinking about cod. Cod were, well, they should still be, but unfortunately they're not, our mainstay fish for shore and boat anglers through the winter. They're not now. When I was knee-high to a grasshopper, as I always say, we used to go shore fishing. A lot of shore fishing in the winter I used to do because there's not much else to do other than pike fishing. I would go shore fishing for cod and catch them. But man, is it tough now. If I go and do some shore fishing films, invariably the conversation would always get around to a group of anglers. Have you had many cod, lads? I did one beach down in Sussex. I spoke to about 15 people. Not one had had a cod the entire season off the shore. You talk to some boat anglers. Some guys go 6, 8, 10 trips off the south coast and they don't even see a cod. Yes, some anglers catch little pockets of fish. They have a good catch. One angler would catch a big fish. You're always going to read. You're always going to see about the big fish. But what I'm talking about is the general meat and potatoes backbone of British fishing. It was the cod. Just think, cod and chips. Now then, no good using these reels anymore. You probably could catch with them, but my God, what a knuckle wrapper if you get it wrong. Bang. I got to thinking about cod and I thought I'm going to track some of these down. Where are the best places for cod? And what's a bit about the history of the cod? Now, years ago, my goodness me, Britain had some fantastic cod fishing. So I thought, I know just the man to kick this off. Phil Williams, up in Lancashire, he stores a lot of stuff. He's the same age as me. No, he's not, he's older. Sorry, Phil, he's older by a couple of years. He's stored archive stuff for years, same as me. He's been a journalist, he's been around since I've been around, whatever it is, late 60s, so a long time in the fishing world. We've seen all the new smooth, slick writers come and go, and we're still there, and we're still doing stuff, still catching fish. Phil made films a long time before I did, so he's got a lot more footage, but he's also got a very good archival library of stills as well. Now, he's up there, what do we call that, northwest area. He showed me a picture once of unbelievable catches they used to get in their little dinghies. Small boat angler, let's say Phil, not a charter boat guy, he's a small boat angler predominantly. And he used to go out there and catch some amazing fish, as did a lot of the shore guys. Let's just hear what Phil had to say about it. And I'm going to ask him some questions just to see, well, how good was that fishing up that way then?
They need to be taken into perspective. We used to get some very big cod at that time, some of them going well over 40 pounds. But also, we used to get a lot of days where you wouldn't see any fish at all. I think what we tend to do is to look back through rose-tinted glasses. Yes, there were some good fish about, but you put a lot of hours in and a lot of boats were out there fishing for them. In fact, at times it looked like a small boat car park. It was a job to get a space to even to anchor. But good fish were coming in. I do recall days when we've been fishing and you hear on the radio somebody's catching big fish somewhere and you're not, and you're thinking, stick it out, stick it out. And then you get more and more reports over the radio, and by the end of the day you think, I'm going to have a move here. So we used to take a move, and then we moved to where the big fish were coming from, and you get reports on the radio just where you left that the fish were coming up again. It was very patchy like that. Some good fish, as I say, but not lots and lots of them, and not every day. On another occasion, I remember going out one day and having a real burster, getting a lot of really good fish. So we put a buoy down, returned to it the following day, anchored up, started fishing, and somebody else was catching them elsewhere. As I say, very patchy. I think to set all this off, I think it was the lads fishing the beaches with the fixed lines on the beach, the set lines at low water, who really started all this off, who showed just exactly what could be caught. These were obviously night lines, and they used to go down the following day when the tide receded off, and the fish would be there wallowing around in the surf, and some of those were well into the 40s. And I think that's what set the dinghies looking for them. I don't think people really knew that these fish were there prior to that. And as I said, they lasted for about 10 years. But yeah, there were some very good fish and they were very, very close in. And that was another mistake we used to make. We used to go out on night trips, for example. And it's very difficult in a small boat with a big engine on the back to just go out maybe 200 or 300 yards. You feel this sort of urge to want to go out further. But if the fish are very close in on the low water mark, that is where you need to be fishing. And sometimes we get really small boats, sort of 12, 13 footers with little Seagull engines on the back. And they'd go out at the same time as us, but they were too nervous to go too far off and they'd settle right in on the low water mark. And very often, though not always, these were the boats that came in with the big fish, which really ought to have taught us something. But as I say, it's very, very difficult with a big engine not to run a distance off. And that's what we did. Well, for me, when you're cod fishing, particularly in shallow coloured water that we were fishing in, it was no deeper than 30 feet. Simplicity is the absolute key. I've come in at times with good cod in the bottom of the boat and we've had the simple traces on the rods and people have looked in the boat, that's what we've caught them on, and we've just shown them the rods and said, there you go, take a look at that. And they don't believe you. They seem to think you've got some magical trace that you've taken off and swapped for this 4 foot long, 50 pound breaking strain mono, single hook, simple flowing trace. That's all we ever used. Very, very simple traces. Big baits, regularly changed, plenty of juice oozing out of them, pinned onto the bottom. And these fish are hunting by scent, obviously, if the water's that murky. What we did find was if we'd go out after a fairly settled period, which would usually be on an easterly wind, because easterly winds were the winds that obviously come offshore at Blackpool and they were the winds we could get out on. When you get a prolonged spell, too long of it, the water would settle out, the water colour would settle out I should say, and then you start to lose the fish. But you wouldn't lose the fish in the sense that the fish weren't there. The fish would just be feeding higher up in the water column, taking, for example, sprats and small whiting, not feeding on the bottom, which they would do when the water was very, very coloured because they were grubbing about, hunting by feel, hunting by scent, and that's how we used to get them. Very, very, very simple tactics. Bait being the key to it all. Yeah, uptide fishing did actually come in round about that stage. In fact, in the early 70s, I remember booking a trip with John Roll down at Bradwell. John said, come down, he gave me a demonstration, and he actually taught me uptide fishing. I mean, you can't get further than that, straight from the horse's mouth, the man that invented it. So we came back up here, we got the uptide rods, we got the grip leads, and we tried it, and it was new to us. It takes a bit of getting used to. I mean, everybody sees it as old hat these days, but in those days it was something that you really needed to think about, not striking the fish, winding down on that type of thing. But very often when you're in a small boat, you're not making the same sort of disturbance, the same sort of vibration in the water that a charter boat will make. So uptiding really, although we did it, usually on one rod and another rod over the back, was something which you didn't have to do. What we tended to do was to cast over the back of the boat with just a plain 6-ounce lead on and fish that way in direct contact. Whether we would have caught more uptiding with the two rods, it's very, very difficult to say. But we got our share of fish and that seems to be all that matters, to be honest. But that is a technique in itself. If you're not making a big disturbance in the water, and what small disturbance you're making which gets deflected down tide, and obviously you must remember that in deeper water it will deflect even further down tide than it will in shallow water because it's coming at an angle at the actual boat and bouncing off it. The skirt area will be closer to the boat in shallow water. Not much of a skirt area anyway with a small boat. So really, providing you're lobbing over the back maybe, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 yards, that was ample. And because you're in direct contact, the bite showed better, you could deal with them more quickly, and that's the way we used to fish. On top of which, at that time, we had basically ordinary up and down tackle. I mean, I was using a rod that was, I seem to think it was an Abu Pacific 30 pound glass boat rod, and the reel I'd matched that to was an Ambassador 12, which is like a sort of a steel simplified version of the Ambassador 9000. The same bits, the same spool, same gearing, same everything, just a different frame to it. The best reel that was ever made for boat fishing, in my opinion. I've still got two of them which I still regularly use, and we're talking, what, 40 years on. An excellent reel. Always use mono, I mean, at that time, mono was the only thing you could use, but in more modern times, we've gone on to braid. Wouldn't use braid, don't like braid at all. Braid's got its place, deep water, very, very fast tides. In shallow water where mono works best. The problems with braid, we use it in the Mersey, which is probably, don't know, maybe 20, 30 feet deep, coloured water, but very fast tides. We use braid sometimes there, and what happens is when you get a lot of rain inland, it's washing the grass down, it gets caught on your line, it gathers at your tray swivel, it chafes away at the braid, and sometimes when you're casting, or even sometimes when you're into a fish, that extra tension on the line, which has already got an inherent weak spot at the swivel, tends to see it snapping, and you're losing fish or losing end gear for no reason at all, seemingly. But the reason is that braid is not the suitable material for it. Okay, as I say, for deep water, not so much in shallow water. Back in those days, I think that perks were in their infancy. I know that Abu brought some in, they imported quite a few from Scandinavia that started to catch on. I know one or two lads that fished the Gantox from down here that had boats up there who experimented on behalf of Abu and tried all sorts of different ones. The Prisma was one, I think the Sexton, the Egon. We tried quite a few of these things. But a lot of people were making perks out of squash pipe. It was in its infancy, all this experimentation with bits of pram handles and car door handles. And to be perfectly honest, they didn't really work as well as the press liked to make out. It was a novelty to use this type of thing, but I don't think that they really worked as well as they could. You can't beat a proper, well thought out, well planned, well designed shape perk that wobbles or sends glints of light out at various angles, something that catches the fish's eye. You need something not exactly special about it, but you need something more special than just a chrome door handle with some holes drilled through it. So I don't think that would have worked very well even. Particularly if the fish was still there, and the fish are not there because very shortly after the Gantox and the Clyde in general came to fame, and I remember those days, I just about caught the tail end of it. I remember going up there and seeing all the people fishing. I got probably 2 seasons at it. The first season was a bit of a learning curve, the second season with more of an idea what to do and where to go, but by that stage it was pretty much all over, and that would be, I don't know, around about 1974. I think what happened was, because these fish are moving in from the Atlantic, moving into a narrowing bottleneck of the Clyde to go over the Gantox and into the various locks, it was obvious to commercial fishermen where they were going to be. It wouldn't take a genius to work out how to intercept these fish, and intercept them they did. And it only lasted a couple of years, they wiped them all out. And the Clyde these days, if you talk to people up in Scotland, which I do, it's almost an absolute barren wilderness. Not only is there no cod, there's not anything. Virtually, completely a wilderness, and that shows you what can happen without regulation. If commercial pressure gets too much, particularly in a place where these fish are going to breed, an enclosed area where it's easy to get at them, that is what can happen without proper regulation. Harping back to the jumbo cod years of the 70s and 80s off Blackpool, we used to get quite good runs of small fish, and then when the big fish went, which they did round about 1985, all we were left with were the smaller fish. And I remember it didn't sort of end very, very gradually. It seemed to end all of a sudden, and all we were left with these fish about, I don't know, pound and a half, 2 pounds, and you could get quite good numbers of them. And I remember that we did. You pull 30, 40, 50 fish, and everybody was rubbing their hands and saying, yeah, but next year these fish are going to be 3, 4, 5 pounds. And then next year came around, and what did we get? We got more of the same. Pound and a half, 2 pound fish. What happened to the 3, 4, 5 pounders? Who knows? They must have obviously grown on, but somebody's got them somewhere. And the year after that, those fish would not grow. Well, they would grow on, but we wouldn't see them. We wouldn't see them as 3, 4, 5 pounders. We get another dollop of the smaller fish, and even they started to peter out. So getting these large numbers of small fish is indicative probably of good spawning somewhere, but as soon as they hit some sort of a size that's worth taking commercially, they get taken. So I wouldn't get too hot under the collar about this. Yes, there are lots of fish about, lots of small fish. I know up here we'll be getting lots and lots of 2, 3, 4 inch cod, but we've had them in years gone by. I just think that there's good numbers of cod about, small fish. They get bigger, the commercials will get them. So no, it's not a good sign. In fact, I actually read a report only the other day saying that Because of global warming, which is driving all the fish populations ever further northwards, because they've got to find this slot, this temperature slot where they're comfortable in, and because other fish are coming in from the south and taking over the niches, what they were saying was that over the last 30 to 40 years, what they'd done some monitoring over catch records, I think it was about 20 to 30% of the fish have actually shrunk in size in regard to the sizes that used to be landed for the same age. Taking the otoliths and the scale readings, fish are actually physically getting smaller, and the reason for this, what they reckon, is that the warmer water temperatures cause fish to actually mature at a much younger age. So they start spawning at a much younger age, and they just don't grow any bigger. I suppose that they do grow bigger. I mean, fish have got indeterminate growth. They can grow bigger potentially, but this was across a range of fish species. It wasn't just one, and it wasn't in just one area. The tendency is for fish not to grow bigger. The fish are getting smaller and they're spawning younger. Now, you could say, well, if they're spawning earlier, there's going to be more fish about. If they're spawning sooner, we're going to get more to work on. But having said that, you've got to be very, very careful that if fish start to mature earlier, commercial pressure being what it is, with fish being missing here, there and everywhere, the commercials are going to be crying out for smaller size limits, because the thing that governs size limits is not the actual size that fish can grow to, it's the size that fish can reproduce at. And if you start reproducing 5 inches smaller than what they used to be, then there's no excuse to not let the commercials take them. I know we don't want to do that, but the argument that we use is that if a fish hasn't spawned, it shouldn't be taken. And the commercials are now going to say that if these fish can spawn at a smaller size, why can't we take them? So it's a double-edged sword. We've got to be very, very careful about what happens here. But I do think that although there's lots of small fish about, I don't think it's going to do angling a lot of good, and the rising sea temperatures bringing fish sizes down, if that proves to be the case, and they're very sure it will be, on top of all this bad weather and lows tracking in, the jet stream moving further south, mild wild winters, flooding, estuaries being flushed out, you name it. Not good for angling, not good at all. So I wouldn't be getting too excited about all this.